we'll get on to our knowledge topic now. So once again, I'd really like to welcome Richard and Stan. So Richard is a professor at the Centre for Crop and Food Innovation with the Food Futures Institute at Murdoch University. And Richard's had a long career in policy, but joined Murdoch University in 2009. And he's been very involved in issues both in research and in his former sort of policy work addressing salinity, plantation and farm forestry, and climate change mitigation. And it's also got lots of research that's very relevant to us that goes beyond the presentation I'll be giving today, which I was noting included some things about how to gain water and biodiversity benefits from carbon and reforestation projects, restoration of mangroves for carbon mitigation, and also looking at deep storage of carbon in soil. And we've also got Stan joining us, so Dr. Stan Sochacki, and Stan's research has focused on climate mitigation and carbon sequestration in degraded lands, as far as I can see, but I'll also let them give their own intros. So now I'll just hand over to Richard and Stan.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Rachel, and hello, everyone. So I'll just give a very short presentation on what we've done on saltbush and carbon with the Wheatbelt NRM, people with WA government funding more recently. That's the back half, and Stan can elaborate on the details there. But I thought it was useful just to quickly introduce ourselves. I think you've pretty well done that anyway, but I'll have another go. So here's the two of us. Both of our Google Scholar profiles give a pretty good, well, they give a link into pretty much everything we've produced, and so you can rummage through that those links and see if there's any papers and reports that are interesting to you. But yeah, basically, as Rachel said, I've been at Murdoch since 2009. I was with the West Australian Government. Was Conservation and Forestry Department, had many name changes. When I started there in '89, I'd done my PhD on wind erosion out in the West Australian Wheatbelt, and it was for a few years prior to that. And also had previous experience with the hop industry in Tasmania, so it was quite a varied background. But with the WA government, we were quite interested in tackling problems like salinity, which is a big issue in Western Australia, both in the water catchments and inland areas. And that's worked on pretty much on government funding forever. And I spent a month in Japan in 95, where a group of Japanese guys were really keen on setting up carbon projects in Australia, in the Australian rangelands. And they had met quite a bit of scepticism in the government, but I thought it was a good idea because they're talking about unleashing large amounts of money from carbon investment. This might sound familiar where we are 30 years later. I guess I was very interested in the idea of saying, well, we could use that to achieve things like large-scale treatment of salinity, wind erosion, biodiversity, and what have you. So we're off and away, and I think in '99, the WA government and BP Australia had one of Australia's first carbon sequestration projects, planting pines out in the medium rainfall area as a carbon sink and a future timber resource. There's also biodiversity plantings as part of that. So that's sort of the motivation of this. And going into Murdoch, I've carried on. And as Rachel mentioned, I've worked on native forests and looking at the effect of wildfire, plantations in and agroforestry, various aspects of soil carbon. Stan and I did some nice work with soil amendments when we first started at Murdoch. Mangroves with the Vietnamese government and looking at them as a source. And there's quite a bit of material online that suggests mangroves are going to be this real bonanza with carbon sinks. It's not true, but it's a nice story. But and that's always sort of the backdrop to some of this carbon stuff is the enthusiasm runs away from the reality. Science and policy, and as a sideline, not a sideline, it's a half activity has been on soil water repellency, which is a big issue in a lot of the cropping sandy, well, particularly sandy cropping country in southern Australia, but won't do that. I was on the fifth assessment report with the IPCC on the ag and forestry chapter, 2014.
Sorry to interrupt, Richard. I've got very poor reception here. It's cutting in and out. I'll keep trying. Sorry.
So you, Stan. Okay, I'll keep going. Let me know when I get to your part, Stan, if I'll just power on.
I'm having a bit of trouble connecting here. I'm on a farming property at the moment, which
someone's got a
very authentic experience, Stan.
I'll turn my screen off and try and listen in anyhow.
Okay.
Yeah. Someone's got to do the work. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I was on the Emissions Assurance Committee for 2 or 3 years, and that's the one that approves the method or makes recommendations to the Minister to approve methodologies under the CFI Act. I've just finished on the Threatened Species Scientific Committee that's under the Commonwealth Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, and they wanted someone with a more agricultural rather than ecological background, and I got them into the carbon sink as a way to tackle biodiversity space. Stan and I were involved with the Greenhouse CRC, which finished in 2006, and there's various other things. Stan, should I talk for you? Basically, Stan, well, I will. So Stan's been involved with carbon mitigation, forest soils and shrubs, and soil water repellency. You know, we've worked together for probably close to 20 years, and remote sensing. We did some nice work with Simon Cook when he was at Curtin University on-farm experimentation. And again, there's a lot of stuff on water repellency, and there's Stan's super pit on the bottom right, where he looked at the root methods of better measuring the root systems of trees, and that involved, I think, a 6-metre deep pit and sieving the soil, and a tremendous amount of work. So that's one of the publications online. So you can read those as quickly as I can say. So we get to saltbush. We've done a bit in the past. So we've got a long-term experiment at Wickerpin in the Central Wheatbelt we set up in 2001, and we've got saltbush, salt-tolerant eucalypts, and in various parts of the landscape, different densities, etc. So it's sort of a particularly valuable site because it's coming to the age of carbon projects, 25 years. It's 23 years old, so there's a little bit of data from that in a couple of minutes. I had an honours student, Lewis Walden. He's now a lecturer at Curtin University after doing his PhD, and we went to half a dozen sites across the country, 3 in the eastern states, 1 in New South Wales, 2 in South Australia, and 3 in Western Australia. And basically his work and that paper's about trying to assess the amount of carbon that's feasible in saltbush revegetation for carbon credits, and the answer was 1 to 2 tonnes per hectare per year. So, getting right to the chase, that's what people are interested in, 1 to 2 ACCUs per hectare per year. And then we had another chap, Ning Lu, who now works with CSIRO. He'd just come down from China, and to get him going, we gave him an old data set with remote sensing of saltbush, but aerial from a plane rather than satellite and drone, and he found very good relationships between remotely sensed estimates of carbon and on-ground carbon, which is a good thing because it opens the door for very cheap and reliable inventory of carbon sinks, if that's what you want to do. So those papers are on Google Scholar profile, but if any of you guys want copies, I think I actually sent copies, Rachel, so yeah, you can share them later on. Across that, 1 to 3 tonnes. We had a bit more at Wickham at 10 years. There's no change in soil carbon storage. So that's in the ecological engineering paper. There's holes to 2 metres. Some of the other sites, which is quite common across a lot of forestry sites on farmland. So people think, well, they'll get a change. Well, we didn't. There's obviously grazing value from using saltbush, which you can think about. Clear land care benefits because people want to plant saltbush to get the land care benefits, and easily measured via remote sensing. And the other point I'd just make is on the Wickham site, the saltbush, we're getting, say, 1 to 3, or 2 or 3 ACCUs per hectare per year at 10 years, but the trees were doing much better. And I know trees don't grow right into the country where saltbush grows, but some of the fringing, less saline country can support trees. And Stan and I remeasure that site just before Christmas, and we'll collate the results soon. But yes, so in some cases, if you want carbon, on-farm carbon on salt land, this country that's been removed from production, it's not, I don't know, there's presentations about saltbush. I'm just saying in some cases you might get more value out of the more offsetting via the trees. Which brings us to the project we did with Wheatbelt NRM with WA government funding. And are you right to talk, Stan, or maybe not? Okay. So this was basically assessing the potential of saltbush to sequester carbon, not to develop a methodology, because the methodology is going to depend on representations to the Commonwealth to either produce a new methodology or insert it into an existing methodology. And some of you guys will be, well, you'll be across this more than I am at the moment. Things always move along. And so we wanted to make the case, Western Australia, work out what was possible in the Wheatbelt areas. And so Stan did the work. I was hoping he'd speak to this bit. So it's basically work out whether saltbush method is justified in pursuing, because the state government guys can make representations to the Commonwealth, in my mind, much more easily than people in universities and outside that system. They have their Commonwealth state committees. Stan measured 30 saltbush stands in the WA Wheatbelt, so it's predominantly cropping country, mainly Atriplex nummularia, old man saltbush. Stands were 44 to 26 years old, and 7 were greater than 20 years old. And we've got the long-term trial at Wickham there, which is 23, and some images on the right of that work occurring. So that included harvest of saltbush and the development of allometric equations as well. So what they are is you get saltbush or trees, a range of sizes, cut them down, weigh them, work out the carbon content, and then you've got the dimensions of the saltbush, and then you can develop equations between the dimensions of the saltbush and the mass of carbon. That's an allometric equation, and then you've got much better estimates. So that can go into the models of like full cam maybe down the track. Bottom right, Stan sieving the roots from saltbush. They tend to go down 50, 60 centimetres deep, and so you sieve them over a table, measure the roots, and so the sequestration in saltbush is obviously above ground, but it's also below ground root biomass, not soil carbon. So you've got above and below ground biomass, you're getting the total biomass. And again, as you know, the basis of an ACCU is that you're changing your land management from one thing to another. And so if you've got more biomass at the end of your activity, more biomass carbon, that's your carbon credit. Seeing out people online, if you've got any questions, I'm pretty sure you're all au fait with this. So the results, total sequestration in the 20-year-old, greater than 20-year-old stands varied a lot, and had a median rate across all the stands of 1.3 tonnes per hectare, ACCUs per hectare per year. But the yields, as expected, are affected by salinity, planting density, belts versus blocks, cultivars, so CSIRO and others developed NRMA saltbush, and that's growing much better. It was selected for forage rather than carbon, but what they're saying is there's a lot of variation in there. Variation in farming systems is good because if you understand it, you can manage it and improve your yields. And quite honestly, a lot of the discussion around carbon over the last few years has been, well, can you get a carbon credit? It might be a good thing, and hasn't moved, this is my mind, to the next stage is what's happened with cropping and pastures, where you're thinking, well, how do you get more? How do you do it more efficiently, with inputs, outputs, grow your carbon more efficiently? And might be different elsewhere in the country, but I guess that's an observation I could make. The economics are obviously farm specific. You've got different farming systems. Some guys have got sheep, some not, different growth rates. And I guess the other point is there's a lot known about growing and managing saltbush because people have been doing this for a while. And in our report, we reference Hayley Norman's recent opus on saltbush management. So there's a lot of people know how to grow saltbush pretty well. And I think that can be translated into growing saltbush very well for carbon credits. Must note, when we make the estimates of carbon, we take away the leaves. So obviously the amount of leaf carbon you've got depends on grazing. In some of the stuff we've done in the past, it might be 15, 20% of the biomass is in the leaves, but we've deducted that from the estimates of carbon. So it's basically the woody biomass rather than not. A couple of images on the right from Ning Lu's work Ning and Stan with drone imagery of saltbush, and then Ning is working with the carbon team with CSIRO in Canberra now after he finished his PhD, and he modified the images and came up with projected areas of saltbush, and that's basically saying that we'd be reasonably confident you can measure saltbush carbon remotely, either with drones or airborne systems. This is from Wikipin, and it's also in the report, and it's showing the carbon sequestration, total tonnes of total ACCUs, total ACCUs not per year, total ACCUs forever, for two densities, 500 and 2,000 shrubs per hectare, and then over time. So I think the red one, I can't, it's obscured by everyone's faces. The red one's 2,000, the blue is 500. And I think you can draw a couple of things out of that. One, as saltbush gets older, it plateaus, so the annual increment of carbon's going to slow down. You get different yields, only slightly different yields with density. And so planting 500 shrubs per hectare is much more, planting 2,000 shrubs per hectare is much more expensive proposition than 500. And they're the sorts of things that you could manipulate down the track. What's the optimum planting density? Because that's going to feed into your economics. So anyway, that's a bit of live data there. And wrapping up, we made some recommendations. We think that there's value in considering a methodology, and that could be a new one. Really am interested in what people online think about this. Could it be a new one, or do you modify an existing methodology? I think 25-year-old year yields of 35 to 50 tonnes ACCUs per hectare are feasible with management. We obviously need consultation with the Australian government. We had some early prior to COVID, and to that stage they weren't really enthusiastic. There'd been various forays into saltbush carbon in the past. John Valder from Sydney, he was involved with the New South Wales Liberals. He tried very hard, probably 20 years ago. It didn't get up, but my understanding is with the methodologies is they're much more open and flexible now. So I don't see that's necessarily being a barrier, but I do think they're going to want additional measurements from South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, both on saltbush that's been established on various types of land, both salinised and some folks might want to plant them as strips, the top right photo, in grazing systems, but also restoration of previous grazing country that needs to be rehabilitated, and have some discussion about what's possible there. And again, that's not what we've got in Western Australia, but I was sort of thinking about the country around Cobar, Balranald, that sort of grazing lands, heading out to South Australia and the back of north of the railway and South Australia, the Transcontinental Railway. There's a lot of grazing country that had saltbush, and is there a possibility of broadening it out? Planting saltbush in some of that country might be a bridge too far, but anyway, that's something can be discussed, and and that's pretty well it, I think. Acknowledgement's an important thing. It's the project. 30 farmers, all very enthusiastic. Particular mention to Ken, Steve and Sid Martin at Wickerpin, who've hosted the Wickerpin trial. Really supportive over time. Steve, until before the state election, was the deputy leader of the opposition in WA, but they've been right on board. Amy Dimity and Felicity Gilbert, before she left from Wheatbelt NRM, Felicity set the project up. Tina Asprey and Franco from the Facey group, which is a farm group down there at Wickerpin, and Cindy Stevens from the Corrigin Farm Improvement Group. So call out everyone, and some are online and might want to say a few words. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Richard. I hope everyone can hear me. That was really interesting. I'm going to open to the room. Does anybody have a question to get started, or did any of the Wheatbelt guys want to chip in with any of their experience or perspectives on the work that's been done in the saltbush space? I did see there was a little posse of Wheatbelt NRM guys.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Thanks,
I'm Amy, and this is Jackie from Wheatbelt NRM. We're the Sustainable Agriculture Facilitators at Wheatbelt NRM. And we've been working on this project since, well, Jackie's been working on it from the beginning. I sort of jumped in about a year ago. And it's a really exciting project. We love working with the grower groups, CFIG and Facey group on this project. So we've been focusing on the monitoring of the new sites. So there's 6 new saltbush sites which are in the Corrigin and Wickerpin area, and we are monitoring the soils, like soil fertility, and we're taking establishment counts. We're monitoring those sites with photo monitoring and reporting back to DPIRD, who are our funders.
And EM38.
Yes, and we're taking salinity measurements and monitoring that through the life of the project, which the new sites are supposed to be the data is supposed to be collected from them in 2029, and the project finishes up then. But yeah, in the meantime, we're reporting on what's happening on the ground, and yeah, we've got lots of support from the landholders. They love growing saltbush and can see the value and the co-benefits.
And the new sites are testing species and mounding versus non-mounding and species density. Is that the three?
Yeah. Density. So there's two trials on each of the sites. So one of them is a density trial. So they're using NRMA planted at different densities in non-mounded and mounded situations. So that's one of the trial plots. And then right next door to that, we have a species trial. So we've got 4 different species of saltbush, which will give us, we've already got a pretty good idea from the report that Stan and Richard have put together. We've got a pretty good idea of what species are giving us the best biomass and carbon sequestration. But yeah, the final data will come out at the end.
Right.
Rachel, Stan's.
I see that Stan, we've got his face and his actual person, and can we hear him? That's the question.
Yeah, I've finally got through. I'm at a farmhouse out west of Kojonup at the moment, and I was told it had Starlink, and I got to the house, but there was no power cord to plug it in. It didn't work off my phone, but eventually I hijacked a cable off their hi-fi system and got it working.
Well done.
I'm sure Richard did a good job of covering the project, and I'm sure he said some nice things about my intro too.
I'm sure he did. He did. You can watch the video back later, Stan, and check whether he's
It's all about
he's
me.
done you credit. Thanks for joining us, Stan. Did anyone from the room have a question? Because I mean, I do if other people don't, if other people would like to keep considering theirs. But I guess the first question that I've got, and I have quite a few that I was jotting down as people were talking. And so Amy, you said like the farmers are into it, they're quite keen. I guess what I'm wondering is, in terms of thinking about this as becoming a potential ACCU method, and excuse my knowledge of WA rangelands, degraded areas, if this is an obvious question, but I suppose given the reasonably low volume of carbon storage that you get from saltbush compared to trees, like would there be enough area to make it worthwhile on a farm by farm basis? So have they got, it's a horrible question, but have they got enough degraded land to make it worth their while to do an ACCU project for saltbush in these areas?
So quickly say, so WA, we've got the ag area in the southwest, and that's about 20 million hectares of farmland. So you can see that on satellite images, runs from 450 k's north of Perth to about 800 k's east, and it's just sort of a triangle. But then we've got 100 million hectares of rangeland, inland, and rangelands from 300 to 200 mils a year, pastoral leases and stuff. So it'd be analogous to what you've got in the north of South Australia, probably into Northern Territory, Western New South Wales. I think you've got pastoral leases out there, and so it's two different things. We had some work with the Japanese out in this place called Leonora. It's about 200 millimetres rainfall, a couple hundred k's north of Kalgoorlie, and they planted trees on the breaks of the slope and captured water. Also involved dynamite and drilling and blasting, but they got about 8 to 10 ACCUs per hectare. But that's sort of really specialised and localised, and I think the economics would be the key thing. But I know in the 1930s and 40s, New South Wales soil con, and there's a similar group in South Australia. They did a lot of work on restoring range country, with sort of cultivation and, basically trying to stop wind erosion in places like Broken Hill and Alice Springs and whatever. So there was a heap of work done, 70 years ago by those groups on restoration methods. But I suspect the economics might be a bit awry, but yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, the farmers that you're looking at in the trial sites, and I'm sorry if this is in the presentation, I didn't capture it, but how many hectares are they planting down in these trials in the sort of saline areas on their farms?
Some of those 30 sites that I visited, it varied from perhaps 10 hectares to up to 100 hectares.
Yep.
So in terms of return on, the cost of setting up the saltbush, the larger the area, the more economic it is, because there's a one-off cost with regard to setting up a carbon project. So, say for example, if that cost is $10,000, then it's divided obviously by the area you've planted up. So in the report, that costing is on 25 hectares, but if you were to plant up 50 or 100 hectares, like what I saw at some of the properties I went to, then obviously there's a greater return. One of the properties I went to that was set up with NRMA, the new variety. So that farmer set up, I think it was 60 hectares there, and that would have been a considerable cost. But there's obviously the other benefit from the production, the farm production. So I guess if the ability to get an income from ACCU there, eventually that will be recovered over time, but it certainly helps with the overall cost of putting the saltbush plantation.
Yeah. So I suppose if you were looking across the WA rangelands, grazing area, and you're looking only at degraded, saline lands for this method, and thinking you could plant that whole area down to saltbush for ACCUs, what kind of an area do you think that you'd be in? I'm curious about it because, of course, ERAC has ERAC these days, they're only really interested in methods that they think are going to be deployed at scale because they have had so many methods that were approved that haven't been used. So I guess what I'm wondering is do you think that this is a method that's likely to be deployed at scale at some point in the future if it was approved as a method? I think, Amy, you were talking, but you guys are on mute, so I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, for bringing that up. I was hoping that Richard would know the exact numbers on saline land in the Wheatbelt, but I think it's somewhere between 1 and 2 million hectares are affected. So it's probably 20% of the Wheatbelt is affected by salinity. Now, obviously, we can't plant that entire area saltbush because a lot of it's natural saline systems, which they're ecosystems which we don't want to disturb. So we're basically looking at buffering the areas between cropping and saline lowlands. To try and mitigate the salinity growing. So that it's quite a tricky space because even now the establishment of the saltbush in those really saline sites can be
variable.
Yeah, quite variable. And we're seeing that on the new sites. Like there'll be an area which is growing beautifully and then right next door to it there'll be like a runoff scalded area and then the saltbush in those spaces don't survive. So if you're looking at getting the best carbon sequestration potential, you wanted to plant them in the better land. Like you're obviously going to get a better carbon sequestration in the better land, but we want to plant out saline areas to make them more beneficial for production.
Yeah, and enhance grazing.
We've also got another project through Wheatbelt NRM because we're really interested in this project for the co-benefits of planting the saltbush. So obviously the salinity mitigation is huge. Livestock out of season fodder is absolutely enormous in WA. Like for people that still have livestock, that is a huge priority to rest their pastures at this time of year. They'll put them in, landholders will put their sheep in on the saltbush this time of year to give their pastures a chance to get away, which is a really awesome grazing strategy. And yeah, another one of our projects, we're looking at doing bird counts in forage plantations that we're putting in. We're going to do bird counts, invertebrate counts, and measure soil improvements over time. And what was the other thing we're measuring, Jack?
Biological activity.
And
eDNA.
And eDNA sampling.
Yeah. But also in the saltbush carbon project, we're looking at the landscape impact of the part of the project is looking at the landscape impact of growing the saltbush and the connectivity. So we have to show the connectivity between areas of natural bush with perhaps threatened species or whatever in them back to the saltbush carbon sites. And we also have to demonstrate Aboriginal engagement as well. And a lot of that is through vegetation monitoring, through satellites.
Right. It's a huge and it sounds like a huge and wonderful integrated project. Are you guys sort of looking at your NRM plans and sort of figuring out the areas where all of these things should go, or what's the sort of mapping process and things for how you decide or how you're looking at the potential? Well,
that might be a Carla question, is it?
Oh, Carla's got her hand up, so I'll go to her, and then Karen, I did see that you've put a question into the chat, so after that, but now that I've gone to, we'll go to Carla first.
Okay. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to talk today, but I just wanted to, so there's some, as Amy and Jackie have said, there's some fantastic work that's sort of value-adding and building on this project, but I just wanted to go back to that previous question about, method development and how this body of work sits, in the scheme of things, and just back to, why it was developed in the first place. So it's really about land management systems, integrated farming systems, and some of the opportunities in Western Australia and the Wheatbelt in particular, in the lower rainfall areas for ACCU projects, were a little bit limited compared to other areas. So it was about thinking, so this is a land restoration activity that was happening anyway and needs to happen as part of our integrated systems, particularly for mixed farming systems. So it was just a really good opportunity to look at its carbon sequestration and how it could add, whether it becomes a method on its own, or perhaps once the measurement, remote sensing is well enough established, it could be added perhaps to the integrated farm and land management method as another method of stacking of carbon if it has a low yield and is being grazed. Its yields are good for considering its growth habit. And it is sensible that when we were on the technical panels for the integrated farm and land management method, the fodder systems the subject was raised, but because most of the shrubs are 2 metres and under, it's limiting for full cam. So that's where this body of work comes in to develop that good method for measuring it and hopefully to add it to existing or possibly its own method. So I just wanted to contextualise that where it started from.
Yeah, right.
So I'd like to say a few things, and I might actually answer Karen's question as well. So this was about saltbush, and we didn't want to go too broad, but we have done a lot of work on dryland species. There's been a lot of work done with mallee eucalypts for carbon, for bioenergy, or whatever. There's a massive work being done in Western Australia on that, and sort of various people have looked at the rates of carbon sequestration with sort of agroforestry, farm forestry, basically stuff that's greater than 2 metres tall. So there's a whole range of other stuff, but I guess sort of just trying to focus on saltbush today. Happy to come back. So there's that, and there are commercial projects. Obviously, there's a lot of commercial people in that space, carbon neutral, Qantas, Inpex, ANZ have got a large project. Mitsui are out there. A lot of people are chasing Woodside. A lot of people are chasing carbon credits from reforestation projects in WA. So that's there. I think there was a technical thing. I'm wondering if anyone online can help. Is the reason we've got the CFI Act and ACCUs is to meet Australia's emissions reduction targets up against international commitments with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But Australia reports different categories. So it reports forests which are greater than 2 metres tall in Australia, and that's another story why our forests are shorter. There's some intense lobbying done 25 years ago to get that. So you've got a reporting category around forests, but then you've got grazing lands, less than 2 metres, etc. And so it's a different reporting category, and it's never been clear to me, no one can answer, is if the Australian government's got to report against different categories, is it in fact possible to have different categories within one method? And I don't know. Maybe someone online can answer that, because I think that's going to be part of the issue. Going back to areas, Western Australia's got about 1.5 million hectares of salty country. Some of it's hypersaline. Nothing's going to grow. It's finished. Some was it's just basically too salty. But I think you can say maybe 2/3 is suitable for revegetation. It's been taken out of cropping production. So you've got maybe 1 million hectares or thereabouts that could potentially be treated by saltbush and other carbon offsetting species. So it's quite a large area. Obviously, the yields aren't great, but on the other side of the ledger, this is country where it's not producing. So I'm not an economist, but it says to me that the rental or opportunity cost is totally different. One last thing is just whether this is a method that fits in with farmers and offsetting their against their products and aiming at that, rather than opening it up to sort of the big emissions reduction. Like sort of the corporate sector who've got some pretty large net zero targets to meet. But again, that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
So Emily,
Emily, did you want to ask your question in the room, or would you like us to just go to the chat? Hi,
I can ask it in the room. Hi.
Good on you.
Thanks. Just in terms of the different types of credits, I'm not sure how it works at the government level, but the integrated land method is, or whatever it's called now, that has been in the works for a few years, plans to have both soil and vegetation credits on the same project, like within the same project or on the same land. So you can definitely, I guess, integrate them within the one method. My question is a bit more on the persistence of saltbush and the carbon in the landscape, because I guess with carbon projects you have either 25-year or 100-year permanence periods, where obviously the aim is to have that carbon maintained over 100 years. You can opt for the shorter permanence period, but it comes with a reduction in credits. But I guess if there's that uncertainty or like knowledge that the carbon stored in the saltbush won't persist for up to 100 years in the landscape, there just might be a bit of hesitation for the government to endorse it as a method. So just, I guess, wondering where that's at. And I think there's a lot of very clear co-benefits in terms of productivity gains and ecological benefits and soil health benefits that come from it. So not saying that it's a reason to not try to get it across the line, but just curious on, I guess how long saltbush lives generally.
I think we've got the answer from the Wickerton side when we put that in, and people saying, well, saltbush lives 8-10 years, it's going to die. It's 24 years old now and it's still kicking along. And I guess other, from the farmers, there'd be others to say what they've found, but that sort of gives confidence that it's not a ephemeral species. It might be taken out by floods, where you have floods at various intervals, flood the valleys, kill the saltbush. Obviously, we haven't had that, but that'd be a consideration. So, but I don't think it's ephemeral. It also self perpetuates. So the stuff we planted, it's often away, it's seeding, and it's sort of sorting itself out. So, yeah. So I don't think permanence is an issue.
Yeah. Okay. No, that I think as long as it, I guess, can last that 25 years, because that's what sort of sequestration-based projects are so far. As a minimum, that definitely points in its favour. And yeah, the fact that it is sort of self-perpetuating and like spreads is great as well. Thanks.
But in that sense too, I guess it'd be a bit like other methods where, I mean, obviously it would have some risk of reversal, but so does everything really in terms of its ability to persist. And yeah, I suppose, as I say, if it can reach the 25-year mark, which obviously proven that it can, then that sort of sets it up well to be included. Yeah, so what's the next, so the question I have then is what are the next steps then, Richard, Amy, Stan, for the method? Like, is there a chance that it hasn't been put forward as a method formally through the ACCU process, as far as I could understand from the paper, but is that sort of that's under consideration?
What I was hoping when we finished was to rev up the guys in the WA government to make some representations, because I guess we're sort of ducking for cover and saying, well, is that our responsibility to take it to the next step, make the representations to the Commonwealth? But I do think it'd need some work from other states as well. And I know there's a project, I think Stan knows more about it than I do, in New South Wales. And, and I've had various calls from people around the country over the years, and they get pretty excited. And and so I don't know whether they're still excited about the idea, but it's not a difficult thing to go out and, well, not for me. Stan might have a different idea, but it's not. It's basically logistics of getting out to sites, making measurements, and doing that at a few sites. It's not totally onerous. It just basically needs, I guess, sort of funding in different states, and if people online want to do it, we're quite happy to, sort of get some local measurements based on the same as we have from Western Australia. But I don't know, do you need a working group to push it ahead? Or I'm not sure. Like some of the other methods, you've got commercial advocates, haven't you? And they think
that's right. I think that's probably possibly the difference with this one. But I mean, it sounds like the support from the ag industry, from what you guys have said, a bit of support anyway. So it might get legs at some point. But it'll be. I'm hugely interested to see what comes out of the work that Wheatbelt are doing in terms of monitoring some of the co-benefits as well, because I think there's room in this space for more consideration of those nature benefits. Certainly the report that we've worked on with the Carbon Market Institute about carbon for nature is sort of, trying to move into this space where you've got more holistic projects, and this looks like it's sort of a carbon for nature, but also definitely a carbon for productivity type project. Amy, you've got your hand up. Please feel free.
Yeah, Jackie's just looking. Yeah, Jackie's got some numbers for you.
Oh, well done, Jackie.
I've gone on the DPIRD website from 2022. It says there is more than 1 million hectares of previously productive land affected by severe dryland salinity, and there's 2.8 to 4.5 million hectares of productive low-lying valley soils that are susceptible to salinity. So it's a big problem in the Wheatbelt region, and not just in Wheatbelt NRM, but in like the Southwest Land Division that goes from Geraldton down to Esperance, that's how many hectares are affected by salinity. So you imagine the bottom corner of WA. So it's a lot of land that is affected and or susceptible to it. And so the farmers are very keen if they can manage, if we can get them to have other reasons for planting the saltbush besides just as fodder. That's where the farmers are keen to see if they can get other productivity value for their land, because they need to reclaim the land.